Hey, John, while you're shaking, come on up. We'll shake my hand too. You're politicking. That's good to see.
He's running for mayor.
He's running for mayor. When we turn on the microphone, it's kind of like I don't have a power up. I'm thinking, Gene, this will show my age. I don't know anything about age. I'm rocking age 50, so there's a commercial out there that's talking about, is it AARP or something like that, saying at 50 you're halfway through your life or something, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people I know that don't make it to 100, so I'm past halfway. No Time for Sergeant, Sandy Griffith. I always want to pull the mic off. Hello? So that's the kind of movies I grew up watching. So mic check. We are in the book of Isaiah, chapter 7. And I am breaking all kinds of records with speed.
Amen.
And for those of you who are not happy with my speed, I get people in the foyer going, Craig, I love class, so take it up with them. We're doing well.
Isaiah 57.
We're in Isaiah 7.
Oh.
7.
Those people think there's only 8 chapters in Isaiah.
Oh, for all of you all out there in TV land, you should be here for the fellowship comedy tour. Right? So we're in the book of Luke tonight.
Huge.
Okay. Isaiah. Get my notes going, get my head on straight here. Kind of where we left off last week. In the beginning of the book of Isaiah, it starts off, it says, in the days of what?
Days of Ahaz.
Ahaz. Who is he in relationship to the good king that we've had, Uzziah?
Grandson?
He's the grandson. Did somebody say granddaughter?
That's a great flock.
Oh, okay.
You're asking who was Ahaz in relation to?
Yes, he is the grandson of Good King a few years back. I always back up because as I come forward and study, I always find out, man, I should have made that point. So as we go down through here, we're talking a little bit, and I did talk about a shift in narrative. We've had the visions, we've got Isaiah in the throne room of God, but now we're talking about real life events. The condition of the people's hearts is what? Chapter 7, verse 2. So the heart of the people were moved as the trees of the woods moved with the wind. Can you get that picture in your head? Kind of swaying. Now, one of the things I've expressed and I've struggled with the book is, and jokingly said I shouldn't have picked Isaiah because I'm not qualified, is I'm reading it, I just read it point blank to see what it says, to see what hits me. How does it make sense? Because, in my opinion, you pick up a lot of commentaries, and it's real easy to say, well, I believe this, and if I tried to ask you to defend it, you couldn't defend it. It's just because you read it in the book, and the book said it, so you bought it hook, line, and sinker. You ever done that? So I'm trying to read it and see what some of this stuff says. Well, as I read down through here, I actually studied a little bit, and I found out there's some background information that really... They're being moved, their hearts are in fluctuation, or the anxiety, the worry. Why? The bigger picture going on is that Isaiah's going out to talk to Ahaz with his son. We've got an invasion coming, right? Is that what's happening? There's this invasion coming down. The king of Israel went up to Jerusalem to make war against it. So they're coming down, they're getting ready to get invaded. But when we start looking at some of our notes, let's think a little bit more about what's going on. If we'll go back to the book of 2 Kings, chapter 16, drawing a bigger picture. Let me make sure I've got my references right. In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord. So already, right off the bat, this is a young king, 16 years, 36-year-old at best when he finishes his reign. He's not doing God's will. But he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Indeed, he made his son pass through the fire according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out from before the children of Israel. And he sacrificed and burned. Let me back up. He made his son pass through the fire. That's the New King James. He's sacrificing his son. He's offering his son as a living sacrifice. Not only that, if we keep reading and studying, what we find out is that part of the reason that he's struggling with these kings coming against him is that he had done some things. Now let me turn to the ESV, because it words it a little bit differently. So in this case, if we read things at face value, they don't give us the full picture, and we don't truly understand what's really going on here. 2 Kings 16, verse 3, but he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. He even burned his son as an offering according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before the people of Israel. And he sacrificed and made offerings in the high places on the hills and under every green tree. Then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, son of the king of Israel, came up to wage war against Jerusalem and besieged Ahaz. We could not conquer him. At that time, Rezin, the king of Syria, recovered Elath for Syria and drove them in from Judah. And then, just a lot of words. I don't want to get tied up like that. Verse 7, so Ahaz sent messengers to the king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant, your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Assyria and the hand of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. So when we read chapter 7 by itself, he knows they're coming. But they're coming, and according to Google, you trying to figure out this relationship between, as I read, you get Assyria and you get Assyria and Syria. As you Google, they don't want to have the two countries going on at the same time simultaneously. So you start, if you're reading the text and you're a worldly person or you're trying to do research online, you've got two countries in the Bible that according to the internet aren't working. But anyway, Syria is aligned with Israel, coming to attack me, and I contact Assyria to help me out. All right, am I making any sense? You're seeing what's going on? Israel, Syria are coming after me, and I'm going after this third country to take care of them, to keep them off my back. Let's see. The bottom line is he took gold from the temple to pay off the king of Assyria. So he's defiling God's temple by robbing it, giving it to a foreign country to protect him. So when chapter 7 kicks in, and he's seeing these countries coming against him, and all that's going on in his head, and it says that they're kind of swaying like the wind would hit the trees. Bring that on home with the picture I just painted. Israel, Syria coming after him. He's robbed the temple of God for the gold to pay off Assyria. He's the type of man who has burned his kid as an offering. And Isaiah's there with his son, giving him counsel. In the name of the son, Shir Jazib, how would you say that? Means a remnant shall return. He He's worried that he's going to get his tail kicked. That's the most appropriate way I can say it in services here. But in this fear, think about what he's done to his God, to the nation's God, to the only God of the universe, by going into the temple and robbing the gold. And what he's done to his children. So his heart and the hearts of the people were moved. I think that's an understatement. They were probably sick to their stomach. So as Isaiah is talking to them and comes back with this message in verse 4 that says, pay attention, take heed, be quiet, do not fear or be faint-hearted. For these are stubs or smoking firebrands. Yeah, Isaiah is telling them to calm down, think or consider the situation carefully. Be quiet in the sense maybe be still and know God, or be still and watch what God does. But when you know a little bit more of the history or what's going on or what this man's actually been up to, he's worried.
Well, Craig, you know, if you're a worldly person, you have friendships and agreements, and you know, it doesn't sound like he's got very good relationships at all. Not with his family, with his kids, his wife. He may or may not have a good arrangement with the king of Assyria. He certainly doesn't have a good, relationship with Isaiah, and not with God. Okay, so you've got all. Who does he have to fall back on? For support.
Who does he have to fall back on for support? I like to chase rabbits sometimes. What has been God's thought from the beginning of time with regard to his people? I will be your God, and you shall be my people. Why did God not want kings?
He was their king.
I am to be the one you depend upon. I am your king. This man, in his time of worry, has done the very thing that God does not want him to do. Keep that thought as we go through the rest of this chapter, as you see.
Well, he feared man more than he feared God.
Or he sought an alliance with men that was going to supposedly save him. And if you take that illustration to the ultimate and apply it to us today, do I ever look for alliances within mankind to save me when my true alliance needs to be with God? And that's a lesson here that but let's keep moving forward a little bit, unless you've got something that I'm missing. 2 stubs, smoking firebrand. Their fire's gone out. Isaiah's trying to warn him. He's trying to give them the message. Ahaz is not listening to Isaiah because he's taking matters into his own hands to try to pay this man off with God's gold from the temple. And that happened to be in verse 8 of 2 Kings. Ahaz took silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasury of the king's house and sent a present to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria listened to him. The king of Assyria marched up against Damascus and took it, carrying his people captive to Kir. So that's a little bit of the background going on there. As he goes on down through here, let us go up against Judah in verse 6. This is the message of what the Syrian king and the Israel king are saying. Let us go up against it, trouble it, and make a gap in the wall for ourselves, and set a king over it, says the Lord of Tabal, or the son of Tabel. Thus says the Lord God, I've kind of skipped over a few things. The hearts of the people, they were fearful, they were worried. God's solution for them was to take heed. Take heed, take heed. Let's see. How do we put that in modern day English? think clearly, soberly, look at the situation honestly. The same solution for us today. In verse 7 it says, the Lord God said, "It shall not stand nor come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years Ephraim will be broken, so that it shall be broken. It will not be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son." I'm going to pause there for a second. It shall not stand. What's not going to stand? What is the Lord telling Ahaz through Isaiah? What will not stand?
This alliance.
This attack, this alliance, it's not going to work. Like you're worried about something, but it will not have a foundation. It cannot stand. Why?
Not God's will.
It's not God's will, but why? What part of this isn't God's will, or what part is God's will?
It says because of the fierce anger of
The land belongs to the nation of Israel, will be established.
What'd you say, Joe?
The land belongs to God's people, and that will be established. Nobody else can come and take it.
God's plan, nobody else can come and take it. Ahaz is in the direct lineage of the Messiah. God's going to protect his plan no matter what. For Assyria, or for Syria and Israel to come in and wipe them out, could destroy things, would go against what God's already got planned out. So that's one of the reasons it's not going to stand. It's not God's plan. It's got a lesson there. Maybe not on every single thing that happens in every single day of our lives. But as God unfolds his plan, kind of like with Paul on the road to Damascus, you can't kick against it. God is in control. God is going to take care. God is going to accomplish his purpose. And this purpose needed, there were bigger things that were going to happen through God's plan than Israel to come. And Isaiah is trying to tell him, trying to warn him, my son's name is, there's going to be a remnant. There's going to be God's people that are always going to be there. There's going to be a thread. God's people will never be wiped out. Any thoughts?
This is a king who is talking to God through Isaiah, obviously. He is getting the direct word, but it's almost like it's a distraction to him. He is on a mission. He's going to carry out his work. He's going to carry out his will. He's desperate. And then God comes to him and said, you just need to be patient and you need to follow me. Turn back to me. And everything's going to work out. That was always the message from God to the Hebrew people. And, this guy had gotten so far off track, just like so many others, even to the point of he's trying to appease false gods. And now he's trying to stave off an attack, that if God is for him, who can be against him?
Reading it at face value, I missed all that until I go back and look at the other things. And even still knowing some of the things, it's hard to wrap our minds around what's going on. It won't stand. It's not God's plan. It's one of the hardest things in my life that I have to deal with on a daily basis. Is trying to not do God's work for him, or knowing the balance between God working his plan. I can't just sit back on my backside and do nothing, but I need to be very careful that I don't do what I want and expect God to follow me and to find the balance.
And the clock here is obviously ticking on the 10 northern tribes, Ephraim being one of them, Samaria being the capital. This is all stemming from the sin of Jeroboam. And they are going to be punished for that. And God is going to punish them. He is going to judge them using the nation of Assyria. And so they're going to endure a time when they're sitting down in Jerusalem and they're watching Assyria roll in, and God lifts his protective edge from them. And they're going to watch their northern cousins get slaughtered and carted off. And they're still going to be told, trust me.
Not the trust me, the statement before that I want you all to keep in mind. They're going to watch their cousins get slaughtered. Along with what did I ask you to keep in mind, John? I forgot already, so it's your job. You got to. That's your job. When I tell you to keep something in mind, it's your job. It won't stand. Now look at verse 9. If you do not believe, surely you will not be established. See, even when Lee was talking, I know that story to be true, and I read that in the commentators. But when I try to read the text, I don't get all of that. So we have to start pulling all these things together about the sinfulness God using. Joanne, we pointed out week after week after week, God is nothing but just. He's going to bring justice. God is going to be just. If you will not believe, what did they need to believe? God is in control. God's got a plan. You can't make alliances with the world. You can't make sinful alliances and expect to accomplish God's purpose. Well, I skipped this. Must do my typing today. I got a slide missing. What does it mean to be established? If I would just ask you that statement, what's it mean to be established?
Grounded.
Okay, grounded,
Strengthened.
strengthened,
Firm in your conviction.
firm in your conviction. If you will not believe, surely you shall not be established. Is part of the wording there, shall not be, are you establishing yourself or is somebody working in you to do the establishing? The establishment is coming because of the faithfulness or a relationship in God, that God grounds you and gives you this strength because of your faith. You don't believe? How on earth do you expect to be grounded? If you don't believe, how on earth can you expect to be strengthened? If you don't believe, how can you have a foundation? Joanne.
I like the way this version says that. It goes, if you do not stand firm in your faith, then you will not stand at all.
You will not receive the blessings of God if you don't believe, if you don't trust Him.
Yeah, mine even says you won't last. Same concept.
You won't last. Bring it back in what Lee's talking about. So we see that, yes, they're swayed. He's making alliances. God's trying to tell them, I've got it under control. My people will survive. But he's not trusting in God. 10 and following. Moreover, the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, now I'm going to read 10 through 17, just out of the New King James. Moreover, the Lord spoke again to Ahaz, saying, ask a sign for yourselves from the Lord your God. Ask it either the depth or in height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. Then he said, hear now, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men, but will you weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a new virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Curds and honey he shall eat, that he may know how, or know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that you dread will be forsaken by both her kings. The Lord will bring the king of Assyria upon you and your people and your father's house, days that have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to read right through it is I made a comment, I think last week, or it could have been the week before, about I am so glad that I'm here today in the new covenant. Because when I read that, I had to read it many times. Moreover, the Lord spoke to Ahaz, saying, ask a sign for yourself from the Lord your God. Ask it either to the depths, some of them say down to like the Hadean rim, down to Sheol, or ask it up to the heavens above. He's saying, how big is this? How big of a sign can you ask for? There's no limit on what you can ask to be shown by God. What's Ahaz's response?
I won't test it.
I'm not going to test God. When I first read that, I thought, what's wrong with that? I'm not going to, God, I don't want a sign. I'm not going to test you. To me, that sounds almost like a faithful response.
It's an unfaith.
It's a very unfaithful. When you take in the whole, if you read it at face value and just slide through there,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with it. God, I'm not going to put you to the test. It almost sounds like I trust you. I trust what you're saying. But when you get back to, I'm burning my kids, I'm taking gold out of your house, paying off kings to protect me from other kings instead of trusting in you to begin with. And when we look at verse 9, it just said, if you won't believe, how are you going to stand?
Well, I think the king realized that this came at a price. God was asking him to step out on faith and to accept an offering, accept something that would be as great as something that is the deepest of hell or the greatest of heaven. But here's the problem. If God did it, which he would have done it, then the king would have been obligated to follow it. And he was bent on following his own path.
Which is what Lee was talking about earlier. And it's hard to see that at first just on a face quick reading. He was very determined to do what he was going to do no matter what. Lee.
We should not demand signs of God unless he tells us to. And he was clearly instructed. Now he's telling God, no, I'm not going to. So I think your assessment of it is absolutely correct. God also says to the Hebrew people later, test me in this, bring your tithes and offerings in, and see if I don't open up the floodgates of heaven and pour it out for you. He asked for a test. And so, we shouldn't do it on our own lack of faith. But when God says to do it, it's a simple matter of obedience and faith. Therefore, we should do what he tells us to do. Now, put yourself in this king's shoes. What would you have asked for? I mean, well, okay, it could, the heights of the depths, it could be anything. It blew his mind. But what's the sign he's going to get? God becomes a man and saves the world.
Well, stop right there. That's back to, I'm glad I'm here today. If you were Ahaz, and you get, there's going to be a child born, and his name's going to be Emmanuel, and he's going to eat honey and curds. When is that going to happen?
Hundreds of years later.
You're a well-educated, intelligent man. Where are we time frame right now? We're in the 730s BC. When is this going to happen? 700 years, not a few hundred years. God, don't talk to me. Don't get... My human side is, how can that be a sign?
I won't be around to see it.
I won't be around to see it. A sign is something that I can understand. How would they have understood this?
Sit around and eat butter and honey, and that's going to save me from...
Well, the fact that it's so far in advance, he can't touch it. It's kind of like, it's like being at your worst possible day, worst possible pain, worst possible moment in your life, and when somebody says, it's going to be great in the future. Well, when you tell me that, I want to jump up and choke you to death, because I can't see the future right now.
But notice that God's weariness has reached its breaking point with this king. And this is the last straw. And Isaiah's tone and it all shifts now to not the present, but the future.
Okay? God's at his last straw. Face value reading again. Show me ask for a sign, they ask. Oh God, I'm not going to do that. Like I've already confessed, my first reading I was thinking, man, that's faithful. I'm not going to put God to the test. I know who God is. That's not the case. Ask for yourself a sign, verse 11, from the Lord your God. Ask it in either the depth or the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, nor will I test the Lord. Then he said, there's a conversation going on here, and at first it's God and Ahaz. And it's real subtle, and you don't see the shift. And he said, little he, it's not God speaking. Isaiah speaking. Whether God's still with Isaiah, but it goes from this conversation to this conversation. And it went from ask a sign of your God to verse 12. Verse 13, he said, hear now house. Verse 13, hear now, O house of David. The conversation is also going from you, Ahaz, are wrong, to now your error, your sin, your arrogance is bringing the judgment to the whole house, the whole nation. But he goes on to say, will you weary my God? Isaiah speaking. At first, God speaking, are you going to ask a sign from your God? Now, Isaiah's not saying your God, Ahaz. He's saying, are you going to weary my God? So there is a very big shift in the attitude in what's happening here. Sorry. But look at the question. Face value, is it a small thing for you to weary men? And I scratched my head and I tried to think about that again. I didn't want to just read commentators and go, oh, that's so obvious. Because it's not obvious. But how has he wearied men? Hear now, O house of David, is it a small thing for you to weary men? But will you weary my God also? The alliances and the buying out of other countries and offering money. He wasn't willing to talk to God, but he was willing to worry the other nations. Does that make sense what I'm trying to... We will worry other people and not talk to God about our issues when God is the very one that we should have gone to begin with, and not be bothering sometimes the other countries around us. It's back to the faithfulness, the dependence upon God, allowing him to be the one that's got the plan. So then, that's when he says, therefore the Lord himself will give you the sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and he shall call his name Emmanuel. So again, just the struggle. How obvious would back to, I've said in class before, we come up with these arguments. If I were there, I wouldn't have put Jesus on a cross alone. If I were there, I wouldn't have understood this. I'm so grateful that I'm not in that boat, but he's made it so clear to us today.
We don't need to miss when he says, "Oh, house of David." God had made a lot of promises, but he made a very specific promise to David about his house and about the kingdom that would be established by one of his descendants. And so Ahaz was an inheritor of this promise that God had made to David. And so it's like Ahaz is suspended in time and is almost irrelevant to what God is doing. He's not the Messiah. But the fact that he is of the house of David and Messiah is going to come from the house of David means that Ahaz has to stand.
Which is back to why he's protected, God's plan.
Mm-hmm. And so, it's a subtle reminder. Remember who you are.
He probably didn't fully understand. And that's still an important point for us today. We do need to remember who we are.
Well, 2 Kings and 2 Samuel and all those books were, he had 2 Samuel chapter 7, he could have read it. the history of the kings was still being written.
Right, still, we need to remember, we are in a sense are part of God's plan being rolled out today. And need to continue with understanding who we are, or whose we are. Joanne?
If we back up and say, in verse 9, it goes, if you do not stand firm in your faith, then you will not stand at all. And then God offers Ahaz an opportunity to build your faith. Ask for a sign, let me give you a sign, let's build your faith so you can stand. He doesn't want any of it. So it's like God is jumping, way beyond. And now he's showing us what we can stand firm in our faith because of Christ.
Well, again, and what you're saying, it's what Leah said, it's what Carrie is saying. He's bucking against something. It's not that God threw one thing out there. God is continually over and over and over giving him plenty of opportunity, the way he gives us plenty of opportunities. Let's keep going and keeping these thoughts together. Verse 17, the Lord will bring the kings of Assyria upon you and your people and your father's house, days that have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah. We can go back and we can read in Kings, we can read how the son of Solomon is ruling. The people are coming to him and talking about, hey, lighten our yoke, lighten our burden. He seeks after the counsel and says, lighten it and we'll follow you. And he goes to young. He rejects the old counsel, he comes to the new young counsel. He's going to prove how tough he is. And he makes the burden even worse. You've not seen days like since Ephraim departed. It's going to be worse. It shall come to pass in that day. And think of the imagery here. The Lord will whistle for the fly. I tried to whistle today and it didn't work. So, that is the farthest part of the rivers of Egypt. And for the bee that is in the land of Assyria, they will come, all of them will rest in the desolate valleys, and in the clefts of the rock, and on all the thorns and in the pastures. 2 countries. And we get an imagery, we get a picture here of this fly and this bee. Anybody got a fly spot? I got 3 or 4 of them around the house. You know what one of the things that aggravates me is worse? What are you chuckling about, John? It's 10 o'clock at night. I turn the bedroom light off and I'm laying in bed and I hear, turn the light on, can't find him. I've got 4 fly swats. One's in the bedroom, one's the bathroom. So I'll go in there and get it. I put it by the nightstand. I'm just waiting for it. One, flies are many when they start to reproduce certain times of year. In different houses you can find them. If you ever set a place up or been out in a old farmhouse and you come back and just the walls covered with them. They're very numerous. But they're also a pest. The Egyptian army, very numerous, going to come in. Pestilence. The Assyrian army, much stronger than the Egyptian army, and it's got that sting, that bee. But how do they get there?
God calls some.
God calls them.
God brings it upon them. God's control. Even those that aren't his people, he's in control. God's judgment, God's justice. They will come, all of them. In the same way, and even the imagery here, and I couldn't think about the hired razor. This shame, this shaving of all the hair. And I've mentioned before in different classes that I've taught her, it always bothers us when God uses the people that are not his own to cause his people to be rebuked and changed. Beyond the river, the king of Assyria, the head of the hair of that leg and the legs will be removed, will also remove the beard. It shall be in that day that a man will be kept alive, and a young cow and 2 sheep. So it shall be from the abundance of milk they give, that he will eat curds. For curds and honey everyone will eat who is left in the land. He goes on down through there, and it just talks about the overwhelming, verse 20 or 3. It shall happen in that day where there could be 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver. It will be for briars and thorns, with arrows and bows of men. Things aren't going to be producing. They're going to wipe out. They're going to come. God, well, Ahaz refused to sign. We talked about that, and then he describes this invasion coming on. It's just a total wiping out of the land. God's in control. But again, well, I said total wiping out. It's not. There's a remnant that will be left. Back to the name of the Son.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
And the child, Emmanuel, that is born unto the virgin will eat curds and honey, which means that Jesus will come out of the remnant.
Thank you. Jesus will come out of the remnant. God's going to protect his plan no matter what. We can't buck against God. Any thoughts before we've got about 4 or 5 minutes we can start into...
So I was thinking about how in Hebrews it says that, we need to believe that God exists and that he's a rewarder of them that diligently seek him.
For without faith it is impossible to please him.
Without faith it's totally impossible. So faith is our structure. It's our relationship with God, which gives us structure in our life, substance that we stand upon. And then we live our lives out, and the experiences, we should be fully aware of them and look for the ways in which we're blessed and rewarded by God.
Well, back to your first quote of Hebrews, the fact that you cannot, and back to this verse 9, you cannot approach God without faith. Period. Anybody else? Joe.
Earlier you mentioned, first of all, most recently you said that why did this come upon us? Because God planned it. But I think if you go back to your first reference when you went to 2 Kings, the answer to why is in that verse that you read, because it says the reason why these alliances first formed against the nation was because the king was following practices of the people who were the original inhabitants of that nation. And it's clearly said they were supposed to have been run out, but they weren't. If the nation of Israel had been obedient when God first gave them the land, and if they had totally wiped out the enemy, then we wouldn't be where we are now. But because of their original disobedience, they're facing what they're facing.
Did you have a class that talked about giving witness? How can a just God expect people to be wiped out? God never wiped anyone out of meanness or out of hatred or out of anger. The wiping out of people was to keep his people pure. So thank you, Joe. Back to, you're in this boat because you never obeyed me then. Carrie, did you have something above and beyond that?
Just one thing, and it's that transitional sentence. He says, very simply, he says, too slight a thing for you to try the patience of men. God's burden has always been light. Jesus' burden is light. He has always told us, if you will do it my way, it will be far better for you, far better for your people.
Look at chapter 8, drop down to verse 6. And this, we're jumping ahead. The Lord spoke to me again, saying, inasmuch as these people refuse the waters of Shiloah that flow softly, and rejoice in reason and in Remaliah's son. Now, therefore, behold, the Lord brings up over them. I gave you smooth flowing water. Whether back to Isaiah's come and taught, I tried to give you plenty of opportunity. I was going to give you a sign. I want you to follow me. I want to be your God. I gave you the easy way. Not only that, you rejoice in the fact that this other country wiped out your cousins. You brought it upon yourself. And it makes me sick to my stomach sometimes when I think of my life, what I brought upon myself. Thank
And
you.
I think the main point here is that there's a nexus between faith and obedience. When you truly believe in God, you obey. When you disobey, you evidence a lack of faith.
We won't end the class there.